Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Enyegolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, despite the aggressive entry into the Nigerian and African markets by the likes of China, the US remains the largest foreign investor in Nigeria, with American foreign direct investments concentrated largely in the petroleum, mining and wholesale trade sectors. But now, with the new US President Joe Biden in office, the Americans are aiming their investments at agro-industrialization in Africa, with agri-business investors targeting the cassava and oil palm value chains in Nigeria and promising to bring in other US food and agri-business companies. We'll speak to the chairman of Africa Global Schaffer, Dr. Mima Nedelcovych, one such investor in Nigeria and across Africa in a moment. And later, we'll be joined by the ex-governor of Kebbi State and former minister of the Federal Capital Territory of Abuja, Senator Adamu Aliero, who is currently a member of the upper house of Nigeria's National Assembly and chairman of the Senate Committee on Works. He's also a big investor in agriculture and is the proprietor of the third largest rice mill in Nigeria, the Labana rice mill in his home state of Kebbi. Senator Adamu Aliero, coming up. Now, Africa is often referred to as the producer of agricultural natural resources, but producing or owning resources alone doesn't count. It's what you do with your production and how you turn your potential into actuality that matters. In other words, major local and international investment in agriculture and its entire value chain. Now, my first guest today has been working with the US and Nigerian governments to try to increase investment and industrialize agriculture in Nigeria. Dr. Mima Nedelcovych is chairman of Africa Global Schaffer, a US agro-industrial company which has been operating in Africa for years and is aiming to rapidly reach 15 states in Nigeria on large-scale commercial cassava production, high-quality cassava flour processing, and consumer packaged goods manufacturing, with planned investments of up to $500 million. Well, in a moment, we'll speak to Dr. Nedelcovych about this and his extensive work over 40 years helping to develop the private sector across Africa. But first, here he is speaking about the potential of the agriculture sector in Africa.
Driving factors are issues that have been raised before. The large population growth, I mean, we're going to surpass 2 billion, the urbanization, over 50%. You have, with that demand side, the potential of, facts been quoted before, over 50% of the arable land in the world still is in Africa, and less than 10% of the water is any which way used. So I think what we're seeing is that possibility basically of the demand for the food, the demand for the value addition. I think that's really where the investment side is very interesting, because as you're having over half the people living in urban areas, you're no longer going to be, people are not going back to their villages to pick up the food. You're going to the supermarket. So you have all of the packaging, the smaller containers, the value addition to the food. All of this really fits right into all of the issues with the SDGs, and that is, in fact, the growth. It is the job creation. Most of light industry, if you've seen historically, in any of the countries going through development process, is often basically the transformation food to begin with on the light industry side. Where I think if I could just touch, and I know we're short in time, on the market size, that's also critical, because you have, and I'm primarily been most involved in investments in West Africa, where other than Nigeria, that's large enough to be its own market, all of the others, there's got to be a real truth integration of the economies.
That's Dr. Mima Nedelcovych there. Well, for more, let's speak to the man himself, Dr. Nedelcovych, chairman of Africa Global Schaffer, and the man who's been trying to help Nigeria and the rest of Africa achieve domestic food security and to facilitate the emergence of African products worldwide. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington there, Dr. Nedelcovych. Tell us more about what you're currently concentrating on within the work at the Africa Global Schaffer Group.
Very well. Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, rather, Charles, depending where you are. We as Africa Global Schaffer, as you stated earlier, have been operating on the continent now over 50 years. Our big focus is agro-business, agro-industry, value addition to agricultural products. And where that is concentrated in a nexus with renewable power, that is our sweet spot. Value chains we operate on are rice, cassava, oil palm, sugar, all of those, but the focus always being, Charles, not only on bringing in the small farmers with us into the commercialization that we produce with our factories and our value addition processes, but it's really getting food product, the final food consumer product in place. That is where the growth is. That's where the value is. Our countries were operating very in a big way in Nigeria, of course, in Guinea, throughout West Africa, and Angola. I would say those are probably our biggest areas of focus right now. And the key, frankly, is always how do we tie in with the communities, with the growers, to industrialize food processes. So we industrialize value addition, we create wealth in the communities, and we scale. The key is scaling. Without scaling, you cannot be competitive. And that's what it's all about. We cannot have, let's take cassava as an example. We cannot have the world's largest producer of cassava, Nigeria, being an absolute minimal exporter of cassava to the United States when the US market is huge and is drawing from all over the world, going all the way as far as to Asia, Thailand, Vietnam. Our customers are looking for high-quality cassava flour, and they really should be getting it out of West Africa and definitely should be getting it out of Nigeria, as an example.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, I'm just wondering, because you have been in Africa for quite some time, I think probably 40 years or more. And I'm wondering to what extent you've gone to actualizing some of these things that you're talking about. I mean, you worked with the African Development Bank, for example. You represented the US under the Bush administration. To what extent have you actually developed these things, having been in Africa for this length of time?
Certainly. Let's give you a few examples. And Sam, the old dog in the business of Africa, going back to the 80s, the Bush you referred to as Bush 41, the first Bush. I was at the African Development Bank in 88 to 93. Ever since, I've been with the Africa Global Schaffer Group in one form or another over the years. What have we done? I mean, let's start with one of the early projects in Nigeria, where we were involved early on with the final commissioning on the sugar refinery for the Dangote Group down in Apapa. Other things we did in Nigeria way back in the 80s included fish farming in Akwa Ibom and down in the Delta states. We've worked in the rice chain, actually. I see you have later on a senator out of Kebbi. We were looking actually at Sokoto at one point, then the security issue got difficult. We have done sugar mills in Ethiopia and Mozambique. We did Buchanan Renewables basic work in the rubber plantation and rubber chip with bioenergy industry in Liberia. We had a monster, very major, infamous, I hate to put it that way, Markala sugar project in Mali. That this was in the mid 2000s. That actually closed at almost 700 million USD. with the Global Sugar at that time as a major shareholder. And then the coup hit. So we started building, and of course, then that stopped, and the country ever since 2010 has had these various issues, as you well know. So I can go across the board. We did future sugar in Ethiopia, you name it. But we come out of at least the ag side of us, the Schaffer Group out of Louisiana. So what is it that we know? We know sugarcane and process. We know rice and rice milling. Of course, we've gotten into now cassava because basically once you're in the process, in effect, that is really what we bring in. What we have not done in the U.S. is farm. We end up farming in Africa for one very simple reason. Once you establish industrial plants, you have to make sure, as you can see, the ability to have the proper throughput. To have throughput, then we need to have our core farms, and then we tie in the community and the small growers around us to make sure that our plants can operate 24/7.
Well, that sounds comprehensive, and thank you for setting that out. And just back to the present, does your work also involve a focus on US relations with whatever part of the world you're working in? For instance, I was wondering to what extent you're trying to understand how the new Biden administration is going to view Africa, for instance, and what new approaches they're going to take, and how they're going to contrast with the Trump administration, and possibly also how they're going to contrast with the Obama era, where they all apparently come from.
Yep, certainly. I mean, one of the things that's been very interesting, and I've been involved obviously in this Africa space with the U.S. Connection Bank since Bush 41, late 80s. The interest in the U.S. for Africa really is bipartisan. There's no question about it, particularly if you get on the legislature. The key is, where does the foci go? Is it more towards the private sector? Is it more support? What we've seen over the years is that more and more has gone towards supporting the American private sector coming into operations, in Africa with partnerships. I think you've seen out of the Obama and W1 43 rather years, both Power Africa come out, and you had the whole MCC program, the health operation. That has continued throughout Trump. Trump has now then came in with Prosper Africa. What we hope and expect out of the Biden administration is the ability to combine all of those and really go forward, because what is Prosper Africa all about? It's all about the fact that the African private sector now is mature. There is business to be done with Americans, because Americans know how to do business with business people. Now, the one thing I think is going to be very important, additional sort of a twist and a focus for Biden administration really will be on the governance, transparency issues. I mean, that will be clearly a separate sort of focus that we didn't have so much on Trump's side. The clarity, transparency, no corruption, the key to contract and rule of law. I think you're going to see very strongly come out, and that, frankly, for us as business people, is right up our line. This is how we do business. We want to do business in a transparent way that is really mutual beneficial to us and our African partners. That's how we do business.
Okay, stay with us, Dr. Nedelcovych. We're going to take a short break, but would like to talk with you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the chairman of Africa Global Schaffer, Dr. Mima Nedelcovych, a prominent agricultural investor in Nigeria and across Africa. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegolu. Now, my first guest today, Dr. Mima Nedelcovych, is the founder and chairman of Africa Global Schaffer, a US-based firm that develops, finances, and facilitates public and private partnerships in developing countries with a particular focus on agro-industry and renewable power in Africa. Dr. Nedelcovych is also past president and CEO of the Initiative for Global Development, or IGD, a non-profit organization that engages corporate leaders to reduce poverty through business growth and investment in Africa. From 1989 to 1993, he served in the administration of President George Bush as the U.S. Executive Director to the African Development Bank, and was instrumental in formulating and executing the private sector initiative at the bank, including the African Business Roundtable and the African Export-Import Bank. And Dr. Mima Nedelcovych, Chairman of Africa Global Schaffer, is still with me from Washington. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And I'm curious to know, Dr. Nedelcovych, how your career path has taken you to Africa and kept you there for so long. I mean, has it been a bumpy ride for you?
No, it's been, frankly, a very pleasant ride, a very exciting ride. I'm African practically by birth. I was not 2 years old when the family moved from the old Yugoslavia, today's Serbia, where I was born in Belgrade, to Ethiopia. First 10 years of my life, and then moved on to the U.S. But I have the passion that stayed on for Africa, for the African growing business sector. The African born and bred business coming out that I've watched over the years. This is really where my passion is. My passion is to get Africa back in the mold and perspective in the world that it deserves. That is so key. And this is why I play that critical role between the U.S. and Africa. From the days of the African Development Bank, I continue today working very closely. President Deshina is a very close colleague. What the African Development Bank has done is phenomenal. We want to really tie in U.S. interests. U.S. is the largest non-African shareholder in the bank. You mentioned Afrexim Bank, a critical element that grew out of those days with Babacar Ndiaye. We put forward at that time the African Business Roundtable. Then that's created the U.S. counterpart, which to this day is the largest entity of U.S. companies operating in Africa, the Corporate Council in Africa. So I continue. I sit on the board of the Sub-Saharan African Committee in the U.S. Exim Bank in this case. I sat on the MCC Advisory Council. The simple fact here, Charles, is we've got to recognize that this is a continent that we really, really want to collaborate with. It's no more just sending help. I mean, the old line of trade, not aid, well, you know what? It's not even trade anymore. It's investment. And it's not only investment, it's co-investment. It's working with our colleagues. And that's how we approach business. When we come in with our U.S. partners, whether it's in the food industry with the FAES group, Nigeria's the Ola brand, or it's with Sun Africa that does the solar energy production with us. And when the two come together, that is the big requirement. The other part I want to really bring out that's so important is the beneficiation of the natural resources. Agriculture is certainly one, but there's also the whole need of, in the mining industry. We got involved with power in Guinea, with West Africa LNG, where we need to be bringing in concentrated large quantity of power to beneficiate the bauxite industry. All of that, to me, what is the bottom line? Value addition. It's exactly what President Deshina said. No power, no industry, no jobs, no value addition, no wealth creation. I mean, the whole point is not to be managing poverty, it's to grow out of it. And that is our approach to agro-industry, if you will, is really adding value going forward. And, I must also say, it's not Nigeria, but in West Africa, I sit on the bank, Vista Bank Group board. We're the first U.S.-owned banking operation that is really focused on the SMEs and the growth of the African private sector. So everything, bottom line to me, the passion is very simple. From practically day one in Addis Ababa to all these various operations, and I think I'm down to only 2 or 3 countries that I haven't done business on in the continent. It's me. That's my continent. I mean, that's where I come from. The irony is English is my last language. I came to the U.S. with a half a dozen languages, including French and Amharic, and you name it. English was not one of them. But, that's the great part of America. You just come in and you really take everything you bring with you and are able to go back. But to me, that is what I'm bringing back to Africa.
Well, I have to say you certainly sound very articulate when it comes to the English language. And beyond that, of course, you also sound enormously enthusiastic, which is infectiously interesting to observe about the African continent. But when you, Dr. Nedelcovych, look at all the problems that the continent of Africa is having right now in dealing with things like poverty and development, and as you pointed out, electricity, good governance, all of that. Is that because Africa has been isolated from the world? And if so, how can they re-emerge into it from that insular place?
Well, much of it is that fact that it's been isolated. Secondly, it's been a recipient of aid versus what we're seeing now, investments and cooperation, collaboration with others, particularly coming out of the West. Part of it is so key is really the African youth, the diaspora that's educated in UK or US, you name it, coming back to Africa. That young leadership that's not driving the African business and are many, are coming through into the government circles. That is the transformation that you're seeing happening. And now, particularly these last 10, 15 years with the urbanization and the social media, the ability, everybody, with internet, the ability to know what's going on, you can't fool the people anymore. I mean, they know what's going on. Everybody in the smallest village in the bush of you name what country will, I hate to say, but sometimes be more informed than some of our own people internally in Iowa, or you name it, somewhere inside the US. That key is, that's driving politics. So politics now have to be more responsive, because you know what? You're not going to sit on that chair if there's not growth, if there's not this sort of value addition and ability for people to create wealth, inclusive growth. It's key. It's absolutely key. And that is why you've seen industries grow right now, big time. You have so much internal growth right now that you go back to the 80s when I first started operating, even the 90s, there were African traders in commerce, but there was an African born and bred industry. The sort of industry, the first that came out in Nigeria itself, with the Dangote industries. And now for every Dangote, you have hundreds, you got thousands across the continent. They're all vying to grow to become big, business that are bringing in that sort of the middle class. That's the growth. It's a sucking up sound. It can only happen through growth. That's the simple fact. And growth cannot happen without industrialization. Industrialization cannot happen without power. So we're right back to where we started. And Dr. Adesina's high fives are spot on. That's why I love that picture with him.
Right. Okay, well, that's. I think that most people would agree with that assessment. We've got about 30 seconds or so, Dr. Nedelcovych. If someone from, say, the US or Europe or somewhere else wanted to invest in Nigeria or in Africa, what would you say to them? How would you advise and guide them? And we've got 30 seconds.
Sir, you have to pick your targets. You need to know where to go. Places that certainly are stable and big markets. I mean, this is why Nigeria is so important to us. You need to have the strong local partners. And once that strong partnership base is established, believe me, nobody else is going to touch you. You will succeed.
Okay. Dr. Mima Nedelcovych, Chairman of Africa Global Schaffer, talking to me there from Washington. Thank you very much indeed.